Hey, third graders. Welcome to your new unit in Michigan Social Studies. We're going to do history now of Michigan. And today you will think like a historian and identify primary and secondary sources used when investigating history. You know you are successful when you can identify these sources in the quiz at the end. So, how do historians, the people who study history, know what they know? One thing they do is to study artifacts. Artifacts are things left behind from people long ago. So, way back before European settlers, even before the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe, prehistoric people called the Hopewell built hundreds of burial mounds in the river valleys and forests of what we now call Michigan. The Hopewell people are gone, but 17 of their burial mounds still lie in a forest outside Grand Rapids. And people that have been there have found those broken pottery shells and those arrowheads and the different things they've dug up. Today, Native Americans want their ancestors' burial places to remain untouched, so archaeologists usually do not excavate the mounds anymore. I have a friend of mine who was actually lucky enough to go on one of these excavations, which is the dig, means uncovering. She found these items in a garbage pile near a burial site. So look and see what different things she has, and what do you think they can learn from the people who put these things in the trash? So, studying the artifacts, you can see bones of small animals, which were probably food. There are broken pottery pieces, so we know they had clay bowls. And interestingly, there is a clamshell. This told the historians that early people must have been trading with people from other places. Are there other sources besides artifacts that historians use? Yes. Below is a page from a diary, and to the right is a page from a history book. How are they similar, and how are they different? January 12, 1850. A terrible blizzard started today. It keeps snowing and snowing. I am afraid we might get trapped in our log cabin. The Washington family lived in a small log cabin. It was located in northern Michigan on a river. In the winter of 1850, there was a huge blizzard. It snowed for days and days. The Washington family was trapped in their log cabin for a week. So both historical sources are about a family being trapped in their log cabin. The diary was written about an event in the past. Historians call this kind of source a primary source. A primary source is a record made by people who saw or took place in an event. The story about the family is a different kind of source. It's called a secondary source. A secondary source is written by someone who was not actually there at the time. So imagine that someone in the Washington family wrote a letter describing the blizzard. Would that be a primary source or a secondary source? Now, if you said primary source, you would be correct. If it was somebody from that family describing the blizzard, they were there, they saw it take place, it is a primary source. So I want you to think about these following historical sources. Would each one be a primary or a secondary source? There's a photograph of a family taken 100 years ago, a drawing a little girl made of the log cabin she was living in 100 years ago, and a textbook about Michigan history. Now, if you said the photograph of a family taken 100 years ago was a primary source, you would be correct. The photograph must have been taken by somebody actually there. The drawing a little girl made of the log cabin is also a primary source. She was living in the cabin when she made that drawing. So it's actually from that time. In the textbook about Michigan history would be a secondary source. They had to go find the stories and the artifacts and the other things, and then they made those stories to put them in the book. The book itself is the secondary source talking about primary sources, but the book was not there. The book is not a story of 100 years ago. The book is a secondary source. So in summary, primary sources are records made by people who saw or took place in an event. Photographs, diaries are examples of primary sources. Secondary sources are records written by someone who was not there at the time. A story written today about an event in the past is a secondary source. Now, taking what we just went through, I want you to identify the historical sources on the quiz. You are successful when you get 4 out of 5 correct.